Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is a bit more on the graphic side. Sorry for the bad pun. But as I was starting a discussion on Brandon Sanderson, specifically evaluating the Mistborn series, look for that in the future, I ran into some data that altered my perception of my reading habits. I thought they were interesting enough to share as it relates back to episodes I produced at the beginning of this channel about book burnout. First, some context. For the last 5 years, I have called myself an author reader. By that, I have meant that I usually choose an author and read multiple books from them in a series or standalone. It's much the same way as I listen to music. I have never been much of a singles listener, except on the rare occasion when that is all an artist has produced. But generally speaking, I will listen to entire albums, or in the case of certain artists, entire catalogs for weeks to months on end, with little fluctuation from day to day. For example, my current Spotify recent list has seen little change for the past few months, with Tanner Uzray, Survive, Niels Fromm, Olafur Arnalds, and Bolter Wall generally topping my list. All that is to say, I thought my reading habits generally followed that same pattern, as relates to genre. With the exception being the beginning of this year, where there has been far more integration of nonfiction, both history and technology books, and literary fiction books into my repertoire, the general flow of my reading has been dominated by fantasy and science fiction books, and the following table does indeed show that. Of those, my initial guesses for top 5 authors would be roughly Brandon Sanderson, Stephen King, Martha Wells, Jack Carr, and Neil Gaiman. And true to form, when I initially compiled my book lists from 2024 to 2021, that seemed to be the case. When scrolling through the table, those few names seemed to dominate the chart, but as I started to move further back in time, it became more sporadic, and it made me realize that even in the past 4 years, my reading habits have fluctuated dramatically. What follows won't be an exploration of hundreds of books, like some booktube channels and influencers like to display. Instead, at least in my eyes, it highlights the changes I have undergone over the course of the last 4 years, which in turn can highlight how reading habits can change for any single person. For me, the last 4 years includes moving multiple times, getting married, having my first child, and moving jobs. And just generally speaking, it also shows the different avenues of interest that I've either taken up or given up. In total, between 2021 and 2024, I read 110 books, though it should be noted that some of this is rereads. When looking at the information, the 5 authors that I mentioned before made up 45 books on the list, which means the non-authors constituted 65. In total, 42 other authors made the list. Interestingly enough, the highest volume of reading for 1 year, which should be noted does include short stories and comic books, was 2021 with 41 books. The lowest volume reading year is actually a tie between 2022 and 2024. But if we're looking at a ranking of each individual year as a whole, 2021 ranks first with 41 books, 2023 ranks second with 36, and then 2024 and 2022 are tied at 15. Now, if we're looking at total books read by individual authors, I'm specifically highlighting the 5 that I have talked about thus far. Brandon Sanderson and Stephen King are both tied at 15. Though interestingly enough, I didn't read a single Stephen King book in 2024. Then next on the list would be Martha Wells with 7, all in 2021. Jack Carr with 4, and then Neil Gaiman also 4, but they were all graphic novels or comic books. As for some of the interests that I did give up, the 2 biggest ones that I can see based on the list here by itself is I stopped reading comics in 2022. I think there's a multitude of reasons for this, but I fell out of love with the superhero genre. From 2009 to 2019 is really the primary years that I was attached to that genre, both in comic book form, movie form, and television form. Obviously, those that can see that timeline know that it pretty much aligns with the Marvel Cinematic Universe up till Endgame. Post-Endgame, I just haven't really been as interested in the stories that Marvel or DC have been producing. On another pop culture level, after Season 2 of The Mandalorian, I lost a lot of the interest in watching Star Wars and reading Star Wars. This is also affected by The Rise of Skywalker, which I didn't really like. I haven't really watched any of the shows after that. I have heard good things about Andor, but don't really know anything beyond what I generally see online. But in 2021, you can see the floundering effect that Star Wars had on my reading with only 4 books read at that time. There were a total of 7 reread books between both Stephen King and Brandon Sanderson. Those would be the Dark Tower series, which funnily enough I'm rereading right now. See the link to Serving the Beam above, and the first few books in the Stormlight Archive. One highlight highlight that the data shows is that, true to form, I did read an entire series including short stories from start to finish, that being the Powder Mage trilogy and all the short stories that take place either before, during, or after that series. Funnily enough, I haven't moved on to the second trilogy of the Powder Mage universe, God and Empire, something like that. I would be interested in reading that potentially in the future, but my enjoyment of the second and third books, The Autumn Republic and The Crimson Campaign, they just never really hit as well as Promise of Blood for me. So we'll see if I get to that series eventually. Now to break down genre a little bit, and I think this will highlight exactly what I was talking about earlier. Fantasy books, I had 49 books in that time span. Science fiction, I had 20, but funnily enough, only 3 since 2022, highlighting that my reading style has shifted away from science fiction for the most part. I have been getting a lot more interested in reading more classic science fiction, so that might become more of a mainstay in my reading habit moving forward, but we'll wait to see if that happens. Then the next highest would be thrillers, which is kind of a lumped category between either crime novels or straight-up thrillers. One thing that I really did find interesting was the diversity of reading genres that happened in 2023. What I found is I stepped way outside my comfort zone while on paternity leave just after my first child was born and read a total of 11 different genres that year. This is very interesting to me because lately I've felt that I've continued to expand that, but I still haven't hit that goal of massive genre changes over the course of a year. And then finally, one thing I did find interesting as relates to, again, the beginning of this episode where I talked about being an author reader, that in 2024, I read 8 total authors and there was 15 books total, but 9 of them were Brandon Sanderson novels. This is me advancing into the second era of Mistborn, but also rereading the Stormlight Archive. What I do find interesting is that I lost interest, and I don't know if it's because I was reading exclusively Brandon Sanderson, but I lost interest in reading. I'm not quite sure why that happened. I just sort of hit a wall and ran into book burnout in July. While I could continue extrapolating further information from this table, I think I will leave it at that. As I have been going through it, I have been trying to figure out what this all can lead to. Based on what I have gone through here, I think it highlights one major thing: the art of the reading habit. There are countless great videos on this platform highlighting how to start and maintain a reading habit, including videos from Life on Books, Thomas R. Howell, and Jared Henderson. All of these can start you on the path toward developing a reading habit, but what I hope this episode highlights are that they can take on a life of their own. There will be peaks and valleys, but never try to live vicariously through someone else's reading habit. If you find a book that you are enjoying and want to savor it, do so. If that means spending a month or 2 reading that book, that is okay. To paraphrase the first ideal of the Knights Radiant from the Stormlight Archive, journey before destination. Your journey is your prerogative, and while there may be overlapping aspects of journey, much like the overlapping attributes of Knights Radiant themselves, your reading habit should always be individualistic. I can say for certainty that I read 110 books over a 4-year stretch, but some of those I don't remember a single page of. Others I remember entire plot lines down to solitary beats. In the rat race that has become our modern consumption culture, don't forget to slow down and enjoy yourself. Well, there you'll have it. Thank you for coming along on this nerdy graphic journey. If you like more content related to authors that I've talked about, such as Stephen King, or nonfiction authors like Nicholas Carr, like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for coming along on this journey.